The Visiting Nurse Service of New York took time out today to thank its workers for not giving up on patients in areas devastated by Hurricane Sandy. The nonprofit, which serves about 36,000 city residents, is continuing to provide care, medication, and mental health services in neighborhoods with limited care options. Many nurses, despite personal loss, worked extra hours during the storm to seek out isolated patients.
We went door to door in many of the very at-risk neighborhoods, Coney Island, Red Hook, Brooklyn, and also the Rockaways, to find folks who were not patients before, but who were vulnerable and marginalized because of what happened with Superstorm Sandy.
Sometimes they just need somebody to talk to. Sometimes there's not a lot of resources. The hospitals might be closed. The doctors are unable to be reached. So we come and provide that service.
And joining me now is Nurse Allison Chisholm from Partners in Care, an affiliate of the Visiting Nurse Service of New York. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
You know, this is a part of the story that I think hasn't really been told, that we think of visiting nurses as nurses, but you were really emergency responders in this situation. What was it like?
Well, it was, I'll just say, as a nurse, as a home care nurse, this is something that you do. We are out there providing care for our patients. We make sure that they get the medications they need, the services that they need. The home health aides that work along with Partners in Care were out there as well, going to homes, knocking on doors, walking through the rain, the wind, to make sure that the patients get seen.
And do you do a kind of visiting nurse triage the way they would do in an emergency room? For instance, after the storm, what was your first concern? What did you all decide needed to be done first?
Well, usually they make preparation before to make sure that the most critical patients have services in place. And the day of the storm, they also make sure that patients that need to be seen on a daily basis get seen. So, however we have to get there, we're going to get there to see them.
Weren't some of these patients on, 18 stories up, no power, no heat? No
power, no heat, no lights. I myself was out there seeing patients, and I walked up 12 flights of stairs with the light on my cell phone to make sure I got to see my patient.
This was the day after the storm?
Day after the storm.
And how long did it continue to be like that?
Well, Lower Manhattan had no power for at least a week or more. And I saw maybe 1 or 2 patients down in Lower Manhattan where I walked across the Brooklyn Bridge. I mean, there was no other way for me to get there. So I walked to make sure I saw my patients. I have a patient, she didn't have lights or heat for a week.
Wow, and it's not like you can just say, oh, it's too difficult for me to get to work during this, the aftermath of this storm. Someone's life was depending on you.
Exactly, and she was on medication that she needed to have.
Right, now 7 weeks out after this storm, now what kind of situation are we in? Are you still seeing unmet needs? Are you still having to climb stairs? What is it like now?
No, most needs are met. Power's been restored. Most of the clients have gotten some more normalcy to their lives, so it's not as bad as it was 7 weeks ago.
And so how would you compare the need immediately after the storm to the need now? What was needed then and what is needed now?
What was needed then was lights and heat and food. Now they still need the care, the nursing care is still needed, but it's not at an intense level.
And the reason for this satellite video conference today was really to acknowledge the work that was done. Do you think it's an untold story? Why did you have this gathering via satellite today?
It's an untold story because there's many nurses that were out there who had so many different experiences, driving through the storm, walking up the stairs to see patients, making sure patients that had wounds got changed every day so that they didn't get to go into the hospital, because even hospitals were affected by the storm.
Right.
So if the nurse didn't get out there, where would the patient go?
And another piece of the story, I guess, is that a lot of these nurses, perhaps you as well, also lost homes, had damage.
I didn't have any damage to my home, but lights flickered as if they were going out. My mother lives with me, who's an elderly person, who I was afraid if the lights did go out, she might fall and break her hip. So I had to make sure she was well and taking care of us, go out and see my patients as well.
Right. Do you know offhand how many in your group had damage to their own homes while they were out? Yeah, while they were out taking care of other people.
Personally, I know there was about 10 nurses that I know personally that had nurses that live in Long Island, lost his home, lost his car.
Right.
But he managed to get to work to see his patients.
Right. So what does the job look like going forward? As you said, we now have most heat, most power back
right.
on, but the need for visiting nurses never goes away.
Never goes away.
But how has Sandy and the aftermath of Sandy shaped your work going forward? It must be different somehow.
More empathetic that you feel towards the patient. What I felt was a euphoria where I took somebody else's life and put it in front of my own to make sure that they were cared for. So you have a more sense of comfort, a more sense of doing your job, being
right.
a home care nurse, providing care to a patient. You become like a family to them.
That got sharpened, those feelings.
Yes.
All right. Well,
yes.
Allison Chisholm, thank you so much for being here tonight and for all the great things you're doing for New Yorkers in need. And the Visiting Nurse Service of New York has set up a relief fund for patients and employees affected by Sandy. To learn more, you can go to VNSNY.org.